Hi everyone who has joined us. Apologies, I managed to start the meeting webinar a little early, one of the perils of technology. But first of all, to say a huge thank you to the Local Government Association Labour Group, very ably led by Martin Angus, who has been a huge help and support in putting together this event. It's really simple. We have local elections coming up both this year and next year. Obviously for this year, selections one hopes will have all been finished and sorted. But Ollie and I are the co-chairs of LGBT Labour London. And we really wanted to make sure, certainly in London, that there are amazing LGBT candidates who are ready, willing and able to stand next year, that know what they're doing and have the skill set to run a selection, win an election, and do amazing things. We were then sort of very politely reminded by some of our colleagues in communities outside of London that there were also elections outside of London and that things existed outside London. We said, yes, we remember that. And we opened it up to some fabulous councillors from the rest of the country. So thank you, Martin, for helping us put together today's brilliant panel. So first of all, we're going to have a discussion with some fabulous LGBT plus Labour councillors. And then we're going to bring in Martin to do some more practical training. So how to get selected, what you do, all of those bits and bobs that, you know, selections can feel really scary. Unlike mine, when I stood in an unwinnable seat and sat in my branch meeting and said, please do it, someone needs to do it. It doesn't always look like that, I hear. So thank you everyone for coming. I will ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, to say a few words about why they wanted to be a councillor when they first stood, a bit about their experience on council, and whether their LGBT plus identity intersects with their work as a councillor. So I've not picked a particular order, so does anyone know, kick it off first, or should I pick on an unwilling victim?
So it's Josh first, I think.
Josh first, great.
Hi everyone. For everyone, it's so strange speaking at these things and not having an obvious audience to feed off of. So if you're in the audience, thank you for coming. My name's Josh. I've been a councillor in Newham, which for those of you outside London or from West London, you may not have even heard of us. We are a borough in the East End of London, just sort of beyond the inner London boundary. And we encompass the Olympic Park and Stratford. And that's actually my ward, Stratford. I've been a councillor here since 2018. So that was the last time we had local elections in London. It was the first time I stood. I was really honoured to get elected. Newham is traditionally a very safe Labour borough, and we did have a brief conversation beforehand about the difference between sort of some of the places in London where people stand and it's quite likely you'll get elected, and the difference between fighting an election elsewhere. And it was very much, it was from getting selected as a candidate, it was quite likely that we were going to get elected. And I actually lucky enough to have got one of the highest vote tallies for a councillor in the borough. It was something like 3,200 people. So very happy with that. In terms of why I became a candidate and why I became a councillor, essentially getting involved in local government or any kind of government really, whether it's a town and parish council like the now infamous Hamforth Parish Council or a unitary authority and district authority, you have to want to change something. There has to be something locally that you think should be better or should be different. Now, I grew up in Stratford. I've lived in Newham pretty much my entire life, pretty much Stratford my entire life. I did do 5 years in East Ham, which is the other end of the borough, so hardly very far away. Oh, and 2 years in Spain, but otherwise complete Stratford born and bred. And at the time I stood in 2018, I was a youth worker in Hackney, and there were things at Hackney that were doing in terms of youth work to intervene in young people's lives and get them on a really good track, get them away from crime and into, you know, not just education, but employment and apprenticeships. And it was just a tremendous service. And I wanted that in Newham. It was as simple as that. I had grown up in Newham and not felt that I'd experienced it. And I knew younger people in Newham and they were telling me they weren't experiencing it. And we were spending a lot less at the time than Hackney was on youth services. And I just thought, this is what I want to change. I want Newham to have as good a youth service as Hackney. I also wanted Stratford to be a little bit more equal. It had changed tremendously in my lifetime, and I wanted there to be more council houses, more social houses, and I wanted there to be more access to community facilities. And all these things sort of compounded. And because I was lucky enough to have known about local government and the importance of it, having been involved in the party since I was a baby, really, I knew that this was one of the routes that you could have influence and that you could change things. And so I stood to be a candidate. And we had such a shift of candidates in 2018 in Newham. I think something like 1/3 of the candidates at the council changed. And I was part of what we dubbed the 5 under 25. Sadly, I'm not under 25 anymore, so I've left that club now. But at the time, very proudly a member, and we had those 5 young members that stood, all of whom got elected. We had the most women candidates and therefore women councillors that Newham had ever had. And we had our first woman mayor as well. So a lot changed. We also had 5 LGBT plus candidates, of which, of course, I was one. And that has definitely changed the way in which we've been able to shape inclusive policy in the borough, get things like, for example, Newham was the first local authority in the UK to fly the progress flag, the more inclusive pride flag that includes more of the colours, it incorporates the trans flag, and we fly that out of town hall every LGBT plus history month now and pride month, and we do more events and we market properly. We've set up an LGBT plus staff network. There are so many opportunities in local government for you to have a direct impact on people's lives. And if you are even considering for a split second of becoming a candidate, and you are as young as I was in 2018 or younger, and you're LGBT plus, particularly if you're a young woman, if you're from a BME background, absolutely go for it. Throw your hat in the ring, because there's no reason to believe that you don't have the chance, and you don't have the skills, and you don't have the passion to do so. And with that, I'm going to hand back over to Ella for someone else's intro.
Thanks, Josh. That was brilliant. Just to say, one person has already put something in the Q&A. We really encourage people to ask questions of the panelists. They know that that's coming. They've signed up for that, especially if you're from a less represented group within our LGBT plus family. Definitely put a question in, and we'll get people to answer them. I'm going to bring up Katie next, if that's all right.
Thanks very much, Ella. Thanks for the invitation. My name is Katie Hanson. I'm a Labour councillor in Hackney. In fact, I live just across the other side of the Olympic Park from Josh. And I came to Hackney a very long time ago, but very much doing what people do is, I basically moved here because it was cheap back then. We didn't have the Olympic Park. We had sort of Stratford railway lands, which were full of dead fridges and tyres and fish. So I came here to live in a house share with friends because it was very cheap and had no public transport. A lot's happened since then, including going on the council, which, it's a decision I've never regretted. You get, it is both very tiring and can be very frustrating, but also immensely rewarding. And it's an enormous privilege to be elected to represent people. And it's also a privilege to be selected by the party to stand as a candidate, even if you don't win the election. It is an honour, and I think you should never forget that. In terms of things to think about when being selected, I'll try not to repeat things that Josh has just said. But in terms of the selection process, obviously it's important to have a look through all the documentation and work out what the stages are. But the thing I would really recommend to people is to identify the wards where you would like to stand and really do your homework about those wards. Now, a lot of people say they would like to represent the ward they live in, which is a perfectly reasonable approach. I actually represent the ward next to the one I live in, which I think is possibly the best of all possible worlds. Because if someone rings you up and says, I want you to come and look at this broken drain that's causing all the problems, I can get there in 5 minutes flat. But my very good friend who lives around the corner represents this ward that I live in. And so, if you're having your breakfast on a Saturday morning in your dressing gown and someone actually literally comes and knocks on your door and says, I want you to come and see the broken drain, it's a bit of a pain. So do think about it. But if you are thinking of standing in a ward that isn't close to your house, I would also have a very good think about how easy it is to get to from where you live, and or how easy it is to get to from where you work. Because you don't want to be sort of permanently on a sort of triangular route between your house, your ward and the council offices, when obviously we all go back to meeting in person. So it really is a significant consideration that you shouldn't neglect. And absolutely have a look at the demographics of the ward. I mean, does it have a lot of private renters, for example? Or a lack of school places, or anything like that really, you'll find information will be published by the council. There'll be sort of demographic reports on things like health outcomes. So in Newham, where Josh lives, there are some of the worst health outcomes in London, sadly, and Hackney's not far behind. So really worth thinking about that, and thinking about the sort of things you'd like to do when you get on the council. As well as being a beacon for LGBT rights, there is an awful lot of stuff that is very, very mundane, but makes all the difference to the people you represent. Sort of bins, parking, school places, stuff like that, all matters. And I would also say absolutely have a think about, especially if you think you are going to succeed and get on the council, have a think about the sort of things you'd like to stand for. Once you've been elected, which committees you want to go on. And there's a lot of stuff that the council does that isn't very widely known. So for example, I went on to the Standing Advisory Committee on Religious Education, which is a statutory committee in most councils, but it looks at the RE syllabus, and it has people who are on it who are appointed by the different religious groups. And you won't be surprised to hear that some of those people probably have less liberal outlooks than the people on this call. And it really is good to have someone there. Things like fostering and adoption, absolutely fantastic to have LGBT people considering things like the suitability of foster placements. And approving an adoption, the sort of the difference that makes to the lives of those people in that room is absolutely, really can't be estimated. So again, it is a privilege to do that sort of work. It's also worth looking at daytime versus evening commitments. I mean, a lot of local authorities in London tend to have evening meetings to reflect the fact that most of the councillors will be in full-time work. Outside London, that is perhaps less the case in some places. But even in London, you may find there are some meetings that are held in the daytime that might work really well for you or really poorly for you. So again, do your research, I would say. And also think about how much you want to be the target of hatred if you're going to go on a committee like planning or licensing, and literally sit there while sobbing objectors say, please don't grant this, you will ruin our lives if you grant it. You're supposed to be standing up for us and representing us. But you're sitting there looking at the papers thinking there is no lawful planning reason for us to turn down this extension next to you. If we do turn it down, the applicant will appeal, the appeal will be upheld, the extension will be built, the objector will get the result they didn't want, and we'll have to pay both sides legal costs out of council funds. So, these are real life decisions that you're taking, and with other people's money that comes out of their taxation. So I think I'll finish there, Chair, and say, I'll finish where I started and say, it really, really is a privilege to be a councillor. And, good luck to you if you're going to go for it, but you won't regret doing your research and preparing in advance. So I think, coming on tonight is a really good example of that. So thank you very much to everyone who's attended.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring in Tom next.
Hi, thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for having me. My name's Tom Coole. Regrettably, I'm not from London, I'm afraid. I'm from Gloucester, a small city at the northern tip of the southwest, about 17 miles from the Welsh border, about 30 miles north of Bristol. World famous, of course, for the annual cheese roll, and also the birthplace of Professor Chris Whitty. So you're welcome. So a little bit different to some of my colleagues in London. We're a small district council, we're a lower tier authority, which of course you don't have in London. So we don't have the full range of responsibilities that other councils do. So I was elected in 2016, and the reason I wanted to be a councillor was very simple. The ward I represent, I've lived here for my entire life. I grew up here. I went to school here, and we had a couple of long-standing councillors who had represented the ward for decades who were standing down, and so I went for it. And in contrast to some of the things we've heard, being selected as a Labour candidate here really is no guarantee of election. I'm on a Labour group of 8 out of 39 on the council. I won this seat by 300 votes, and it's the safest seat in the county. So even our safest seats are on a knife edge. My leader won by 19 votes, my deputy leader won by 12, and my neighbouring ward won by 36. So even when our seats are safe, they're on a knife edge, and that really does mean you absolutely cannot drop the ball at all. You have to be on it constantly. I think, as has been said, it is a real privilege to be a councillor, and for me it's a particular privilege to represent the area where I grew up, which, as I said, although we're not in London, we do have some similarities in that my ward is in the top 2% most deprived wards in the country. So we've got really high levels of deprivation, which presents some challenges, but also some really great opportunities to make a real impact on people's lives. I think representing the area where you live and grew up, as has been alluded to, you do have to forego that anonymity you get, and it is impossible to get out of the Tesco Express in more than about half an hour, even if you've just popped out for milk, because there will be someone there who wants to talk to you very urgently about something. But I think for me personally, it's worth it. The trade-off's worth it. In terms of being a councillor, as I said, I'm an opposition councillor. So that's not it's not that you can't achieve things from opposition. It is harder. It can be done. I've found a number of ways of doing that, some of which does intersect with being LGBT. And I am going to say something a bit dirty, probably, in that I do work very closely with my Conservative and Liberal Democrat colleagues on the council. And my experience as an LGBT councillor has been overwhelmingly positive. It's been like a non-issue. And I remember one of the Lib Dem councillors once said to me, representing the type of community you do, it must be really difficult being gay. And I'm like, Paul, they're worried about how they're going to feed their children. They really don't care if I'm gay or not, as long as I do a good job for them. And so I've been really fortunate. But what I have been able to do at the council is use those experiences cross-party to work really heavily on our equalities agenda. Back when I was elected, myself, one of the LGBT Lib Dem councillors and the Conservative Cabinet Member for Community set up a cross-party equalities working group of officers from key departments. And we've met monthly, every month for the past 5 years, to look at things like, so I think of our most recent meeting, it was with officers from housing, to make sure when we're dealing with LGBT people who are homeless or have housing issues, are staff using appropriate language? Are they aware of particular issues? And so we've worked cross-party to achieve things like that, which are really significant, and things which are really simple, like making sure we're flying the right flags at the right times, making sure we're flying the Progress Pride flag this month and stuff. Katie touched on committees, and I've been really lucky that for 5 years I've chaired the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is the only committee here which is chaired by a member of the opposition. And of course, when Overview and Scrutiny is done properly, as we do it, it should be non-political. And that's been a real opportunity to facilitate opposition members and also backbench administration members to feed into policy development and to work collaboratively to make life better for residents and to change those policies. That's not to say that we always agree, and I think as an opposition member I would never be afraid of a stunt, because sometimes you do have to take a stand, and it's hard, but you can achieve stuff. I remember a couple of years ago the administration decided to close the council reception every Wednesday for staff training, which we objected strongly to. So me and my ward colleagues set up shop outside the council in the deck chair to see if anyone turned up, and 130 people turned up on that Thursday. And so we did that every Wednesday. The council was closed for 9 months until the cabinet member resigned, was succeeded by his daughter, and her first act was to reverse the closure and issue a public apology and admit we were right. So, being in opposition, two sides of the coin, working with the other parties to achieve stuff when you do agree, taking a stand when you don't, never being afraid of a stunt. And like I said, certainly using my experiences as an LGBT councillor to feed into policy development, inform how we deliver our services and make sure we're really delivering the best for our residents. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. I'm sure you got rained on more than once in your 9 months outdoors. I will bring in Danny now.
Thanks so much, Anna, and thanks everyone. It's really great to be with you all tonight. I'm the leader here in the Royal Borough of Greenwich, and actually we have a long-standing relationship with famous queens, with Elizabeth I being born here, as well as Henry VIII. So lots of fascinating connections, but also really important LGBT history. We were the home of Beautiful Thing. For those of you who may have seen that film, being filmed at Thamesmead, which is massive for us, and it's been really nice actually as leader, I think, to be able to be so kind of visible and to be in a place where there is such a strong connection and a community. That has come with challenges in terms of I suppose the connection to who I am and then what people expect in terms of leadership and representation, but overwhelmingly I think that's been a positive thing. It's really interesting because ours is a borough of sort of contradiction. So I was 11 when Stephen Lawrence was murdered about a mile from where I lived, and that had a huge impact on my life, coming from frankly a very white working class, mostly racist family. It wasn't until I got to secondary school that I sort of understood and was educated about, you know, kind of actually what was going on our estate, but also about the world in which we lived, and I suppose a real understanding about equalities, and then working out who I was led me to join our youth council, and I became involved in that, representing my school, and got sort of interested and involved in politics, and found my way into Labour, and then got lucky. There was a by-election in my ward, which I stood and won in 2004 when Shooters Hill was a marginal Tory seat, and we've now got a really good and sort of solid base of support. So I think I'm really lucky to have been able to sort of work my way up through the council, and I think that's been really helpful in terms of understanding how it all works, because as Katie and others have alluded to, it's, you know, sometimes coming in to sort of change the world, and then you wonder why you're on the Highways Committee or what it's all about, can be a little bit dispiriting. But actually, you can more than you can in Westminster for sure, make like really tangible, significant differences to your communities. And I think when I'm dead and buried, they will say, "Here lies Danny Thorpe, who got a one-way system on Red Line Lane," and that will be my massive achievement. Never mind having a big ding dong with Gavin Williamson that will come a bit later on down the patch. But overall, I think, you know, it's great to be part of, you know, a family in London, and it is a family. There are actually a number of us as leaders who are out and proud. You can see sort of people across London actually in really visible positions, and so it's great to be a part of that. And I hope certainly that when we get out of this, we can all sort of reconnect and enjoy catching up, but also I think, as Bruno said in the chat, sort of supporting each other. And I think if you are an LGBTQI++ candidate who is, you know, out and about, do let people know so that we can try and come and support you, because everyone's walls are sort of varying levels of organisation. And actually, I think hopefully the LGBT Labour Group can sort of really make sure that's part of campaigning going forward, because it can be lonely at the start for all of us, but there's lots of fun to be had when you eventually make it. So yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you. And last but not least, Michael, who looks like he has been to the hairdressers in the past 24 hours, looking very sharp. So please do take it away.
Thanks, Ella, and sorry for getting cut out. Internet connection is the life of being on Zoom. Ella, let me just say thank you to you and Ollie for organising such an important event, and to LGBT Labour for the pioneering work you continue to do on behalf of all of us speaking up for us. You're doing great work, and it's very much appreciated. Somebody once said that the first commandment of any civilized society is to let people be different. And I think that's absolutely critical. And we shouldn't only let people be different, we should elevate people who are different to positions of power and authority, whether that be in Westminster, Whitehall, or indeed, crucially, as Danny's just said, within town halls. And tonight is a great opportunity to talk about the difference you can make as somebody from the LGBT plus community by being in that position of responsibility. And why is it important that we elect LGBT plus people into town halls across the country? Because only 6% of councillors in 2018 identified themselves as being from the LGBT plus community, shifting from 3.9% in 2010. So almost a decade, barely a couple of percentage points shift. That's a crying shame. Why? Because we shouldn't then be surprised that there are still councils around the country who refuse to fly the pride flag or campaign on wider equality issues. And that won't change until our town halls are representative of the LGBT plus community. I'm 33 years old. I was born in 1987, and my life from being born to now almost tracks the introduction of Thatcher's vile piece of legislation, Section 28. And it took a Labour government, and it took campaigners like Katie and others who came before us arguing against that vile piece of legislation and standing up for us in our local communities to make sure that we felt comfortable to stand for elected office without fearing for ourselves. And I think what we've got to do is be allies and ambassadors. So in this critical set of elections that are coming up this May, possibly the biggest set of local elections that we've had since the Second World War because of the delays that we've had around coronavirus, we've got to make sure we're on the phones, on dialogue, campaigning for our LGBT brothers and sisters around the country to make sure that we can shift that dial even further and continue to advance the cause of equality. I think you only have to look, and this is what motivated me getting into local politics, at the clock being turned back by this government. Anybody who ever thought the battles around equality and progress were won and fought and won, now look at what this government, even more right-wing than Thatcher's government, are doing, turning the clocks back. Underhand attacks on our trans brothers and sisters in a despicable fashion. And I was just I noticed there was a question on the chat about supporting people from the trans community to stand for elected office. And let me just say to those people on the call tonight who are from the trans community, you have allies, you have ambassadors, both within the party and in society. Please stand for elected office. We need your voice. It's no longer acceptable in this country for us to be talking about you without you around the table. So please stand. We're here to be allies and ambassadors and champions side by side with you. We need your voice in town halls around the country. Like Tom, I was elected in an area in Gedling. I'm deputy leader, the first openly gay deputy leader we've had on the council. I remain the only openly gay county councillor because I'm in an area where there's a borough and a county council, very different to London where there are unitary authorities. And I came out in public office. And I can tell you the only reason I came out was because I was given confidence to come out by people like Katie and others who had gone before us, standing and arguing for the LGBT plus community, and indeed the work you were doing as LGBT Labour and figures like Michael Cashman, who was so inspirational in politics. And I think it's incumbent on us in elected office from the LGBT community to create that environment where people feel confident enough to stand forward, to win those seats, to change their communities for the better. Local government's an exciting place to be. And, in spite of all the really difficult cuts there have been over the last decade, it's still the place where you can change people's lives for the better. Be that helping a family with childcare issues, helping, an elderly family with care in dignity in old age, or fixing a pothole on somebody's street, actually, that may make a real difference, to that person on that road. It's still the place where you can make a real difference day in, day out. And we've got to shift that dial. 70% of councillors are over the age of 55 still. It's an absolute crying shame. And so I think Josh's rallying call to people at the start of the session tonight, if you're listening tonight to the meeting and you're thinking, I'd like to do this, I'd like to stand, don't think about it again. Commit now that you're going to put yourself forward for the next set of elections. Stand. And I can promise you, those of us on this call, when we're allowed to get back out on the doorsteps again, we'll be there, we'll be campaigning with you, and we'll be making sure that we can plant some of those pride flags right across town halls throughout the country and start changing this country for the better again. And hopefully in 2024, elect a Labour government again to start changing lives for the better across the country. But just thank you to you, Ella and Ollie. I think this is such an important event, and it's so great to share a platform with so many friends. And particularly like people like Katie, who I owe my confidence of coming out in public office to have gone before us and argued our corner. So thank you for inviting me tonight.
You're more than welcome, and to thank you all for coming. I want to pick up on one thing you said, because we've already had a number of questions about transphobia within the Labour Party and with broader society, and how we can encourage our trans siblings to stand for office. So that's sort of a two-part question. What can we do to encourage more trans people to run for office, and how can we support them as allies if we're not a part of that community? I'm not prescribing an order anymore. So if anyone wants to jump in, they can.
Can I just say, oh, go ahead. No, you go first, Michael, and I'll come in.
Just very, very briefly, Ella, I mean, I did Anwyn Munston, who's a councillor for us in Wolverhampton. I was fortunate enough to be invited alongside her and colleagues from the trans community in Manchester. I think it was a couple of years ago. It was the first time the LGA Labour Group, working with you, LGBT Labour, had done a specific event around being a councillor for the trans community. And I think there is something about making sure that we create safe spaces for people, that we create spaces where people feel that they can be comfortable about talking about their own experiences, both positive and negative. And just from my own personal perspective, Ella, I have to say I learned an awful lot being at that event about some of the particular issues faced by the trans community. And I think, one of the things I think would be, a huge improvement in the Labour Party and the wider Labour movement is just a few of us who aren't from the trans community just shutting up every once in a while and doing a bit of listening and reflecting and just hearing what our trans siblings are saying about the experience that they have and taking that on board and then doing what we can to support them. But I think certainly specific events where we can support them is really important. And also, I still think councils themselves, where Labour are in control, have got to be doing more to make sure that there's support for candidates coming forward, whether they're from the trans community, whether they're LGBT+, whether they're disabled, women. There are only 1 in 5 council leaders around the country who are women. I mean, it's absolutely shocking in 2021. So councils have got to play a bigger role as well, Ella, as well as the party itself.
I just want to say that I think, as Michael alluded to earlier, unfortunately, we all know there are some really nasty, narrow-minded people in society and in the party who do have transphobic views. And sometimes, in my opinion, the party has not dealt with it as adequately as it should do, and I think we've got a lot of work to do. But that said, there are thousands of Labour councillors across the country who are allies of the trans community, and we'll call it out, and we'll stand up and we'll offer any help we can. And so if you see us on Twitter, on Facebook, or whatever, message us. And and I know I speak for, as I said, thousands of my colleagues when I say we will do whatever we can to help. On a personal level, I'm really conscious of the fact that as a white gay man, I enjoy a privileged position in the LGBT community and in society. And so I think it's incumbent upon me and people like me to use that privilege and our platform to call out transphobia whenever we can, because I know that many of the reasons I enjoy the privilege I do today, the relative privilege I do today, was because of the activism of trans people in the past to bring about those changes. And now it's incumbent upon us to do the same to help them.
I think it's really important. I mean, I agree with everything that Michael and Thomas said, but the party is always going to get things wrong if those people aren't at the table. And we need trans activists, trans members, non-binary members to stand. We just do. And if you are thinking of standing, if you're considering it, and you are worried about, I answered one question in the Q&A, but if you are thinking about standing and you're worried about that backlash, both internally and outside, approach LGBT+ Labour, approach allies that you have in the party, approach people like myself, Michael, Katie, Danny, Tom, Ella, Ollie and Martin as well. There are many, many more, but chat to us and say, this is where I am, this is where I live, this is my chances of being selected. I want to stand, how can you help, right? And that way, we can't guarantee that you won't face transphobia, just like we sadly can't guarantee that anybody who puts their name forward for any position won't face discrimination. I know that people in this group, myself included at times, have faced types of discrimination in the party and outside the party, but the party is better for the experience of people like us, and will be better for the experience of trans members like yourselves watching if you put your name forward, reach out for that support, and get ready for the fight, quite frankly, because without your voice at the table, it's never going to get better. And we can only do so much and change so much speaking on your behalf. And sometimes it's really important, as Michael said, and as Tom said as well, to stand up and to speak up for trans members and to say that this is wrong and this needs to change, but we can only speak up on your behalf so much. We need your voice in the movement as well, and we want to be able to step aside and put your voice up there and say, this is who we should be listening to. So reach out to us, out to others, and put your name forward, please.
Just another suggestion, really. I agree that everything that's been said already, but it's worth thinking about whether there's anyone who would be willing to be your mentor. Obviously, there are some trans counsellors, not very many, but even someone who is not a trans counsellor but is a counsellor and is an ally. There may be things that you might be able to shadow them at meetings. I mean, while we're all having to meet online, you can go to any council meeting you want. I mean, you know, they're not all like that. That parish council, but this will, you know, I would hope it would give people confidence and more understanding of the work of a councillor. And if you are seeking, as you say, oh well, you know, I've been mentored by Councillor Josh Garfield and I've attended meetings with him to observe and to find out more, that can only help you, because people will see that you're taking the process seriously and that you genuinely want to learn more. Because, you know, it's not like being a counsellor, it's not really like another job where you can, you know, go in at an entry-level position and gain experience and then seek a promotion. It's very much 0 to 100 overnight. So any preparation you can do will help you, and of course it will help your constituents in the future, because things will come along and trip you up, and having someone you can just run stuff by it really is your best friend. I mean, it could be a former councillor even, because I'm trying to think, very, very early, when I was just elected, someone rang me up and claimed that this building was being erected without planning permission. And I went to visit him and took a photograph of the building. And then when I went back home and checked, it did have planning permission. But in the meantime, this guy had sort of been to his residence committee and said, oh, Councillor Hanson's visited the site and taken photographs and she's going to get it taken down for us. And, you know, I hadn't promised to get it taken down. I promised to look into it, but I might have been even more cautious if I'd known what was going to happen. So I realise I've veered off the trans issue that was the focus of the question, but at the risk of repeating myself, you will never regret learning more about this stuff and doing your homework and your preparation and having a friend to run things past. Again, you'll never regret that.
Danny, do you want to come in, or shall I crack on with the next question?
Well, the only thing I sort of reflected on really was, I suppose we have a real problem, don't we, in the party with visibility around trans representation. And it sort of also links into a point that I think Peter's raised in the chat around how we deal publicly with our own identities. And I have to say, it is, and I think continues to be for all of us, a struggle, you know, and I think it's much more pressured in our community than it is in other domains. And I suppose one of the things I've sort of talked to people about is, you know, like as you become, I'm sort of joking about this with Tom Copley, really, sort of worst person, is that, you know, like with power comes responsibility, you know, and actually a couple of years ago, I could have done what I liked really out and about with my mates and not really worried about it. And actually, you know, I now get people coming up to me in Sainsbury's saying, excuse me, dear, is it you? You know, and actually, in terms of even within our community, that is, I suppose, it's a great opportunity because you kind of get people coming up saying, thanks for what you're doing, really love it, you know, thanks for being so visible. And then there's grief that comes with it as well, and sort of risks. So it's not an easy question to answer, and I suppose really particularly talking to trans people about what stage they're at with their own identity and how you can best support that and make sure that the sort of measures are in place to support people on their journey is something we probably need to get better at. And I think if we did have more Jackie Weaver types in the Labour Party, hopefully we wouldn't have seen as much rubbish as we've seen in terms of abuse over the past couple of years, because that has been terrible.
Thanks, everyone. And just to say that, you know, to all the trans people on this call who are wanting to run for council, you will always have an ally in LGBT plus Labour. And whilst we don't get involved in selection processes, when it comes to election processes, we can definitely help and support and do phone banks and all those wonderful things. I know someone specifically has asked in the chat about them. I wanted to pick up on one question in our question answer from our wonderful treasurer, Tom Rutland, who said that, I'll read it out directly because I think it's a really fantastic question. And he said, I imagine for a lot of us, one of the reasons we care so much about politics has to do with our sexuality, but sometimes it's tough to work out how to talk about that in a way that translates to straight and cis audiences. How did you handle that in your selection and journey to becoming a councillor? And again, it's a free-for-all. Whoever wants to answer that question can.
I think there is something, Ella, about, I mean, I came out, as I said, in public office and then had to stand for re-selection and actually did face some underhand homophobia by party members who tried to use the fact I'd come out as a reason for not being selected. Could you believe it, in the Labour Party? But it happens. And I think there's something about, you know, it takes confidence in you having supported allies, as Kate said, to do this. But I just took the issue head on. I wrote to all party members and said, which is the truth, I know what it's like to fight for Labour values because I'm the only openly gay Labour councillor on the Labour group, you know, and sorry, that was my speaker time. It's got a low battery. But, you know, I think there is something about, and it does take confidence to do this and support from friends and allies to do it. But being upfront with party members, and you know, I got so many calls and people writing back to me as party members saying it's really important, Michael, that we get you re-elected so that that voice is being heard and that community is being heard in the council chamber. So, you know, it wasn't the easiest thing to do. It was only done with support from friends and colleagues in the party. But I think where that homophobia still exists, that transphobia still exists in the party, as Tom said earlier, we've got to call it out and we've got to confront it. And actually, I think the vast majority of Labour Party members are very, very supportive. I think talking about these issues with the community sometimes, you know, as well, which is sort of sat within Tom's question, can be difficult. You know, if you're in an area where there is a, you know, a particular demographic, some of these issues can be really, really difficult. You know, as Tom said, but by and large, I have to say, actually, the general public were far more supportive when I came out than the Labour Party was. You know, make of that what you will, but I'm just being honest. So I think it's back to Katie's point about mentors, friends, allies, you know, your family, if you can use them as well, to give you that self-confidence, and finding the Labour Party members who will stand by you and stand up for you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. On the allies point, I mean, you know, it may not come up unless you bring it up during the selections. And in a way, you know, the risk is you're stuffed either way, because if you say, oh, and by the way, I'm gay or whatever, people will say, well, what's that got to do with the selection, you know? But if you don't bring it up, they may later say, well, why did you never mention that during the selections? So you'll always end up making someone unhappy. I mean, I think if you are active in LGBT Labour, there's no harm in putting that on your CV, because it shows that you are, you know, actively involved in campaigning and policy development and things like that, which is directly relevant to being a councillor, and in a way might be an easier way of raising it in the context of experience of campaigning and lobbying, as opposed to just, you know, describing your identity. I don't know, maybe some people will say that's a cop-out, but I think being involved in a socialist society is fantastic experience because of the role we've played in, you know, campaigning within the Labour Party for Labour Party policy development, and you know, and when I, you know, things I thought we'd completely lost on, frankly. So when several partnerships came in, they said, oh, but we can't sort of retrospectively change pension arrangements. And at one time I thought we were going to have to swallow that, and then but we actually won. And on the goods and services discrimination, you know, again, we were the ones who actually suggested to the party leadership, because they said there was no time for legislation in Parliament, and we said, why don't you use secondary legislation? And that's what happened. So it's fantastic to be in a society with people who really actually do know which way is up and have got experience of things like legislation and policy making, as well as of just sort of going on marches and being visible, which is important too. And I'm not knocking in any way, shape or form, but I think some of our real successes have actually been because of the very experienced members we have who know about things like how legislation is made.
I think the thing that I was sort of reflecting on, there were sort of two things really. Was one, confidence doesn't come easy. So although people are in kind of positions of power and responsibility, I think personally from all of the people I know in our family, there's people who are always working on that issue. And, you know, I remember sort of doing a meeting very early on as leader with a group of faith leaders. And one of them said to me, we'd like to talk about your lifestyle choices. And I was like, okay, well, like there's the door. Because actually, number one, it's not a lifestyle choice. Number two, like we're here to discuss whatever we're discussing. And it was, I mean, I didn't, so it was sort of like with a shit myself thinking kind of difficult to really chuck them out, but like I went ahead with it anyway for like the dramatic impact. But it kind of got the message out that actually, you know, there are lines and boundaries where, you know, that just can't be crossed, and that actually you have to be confident in sort of challenging behaviour. And obviously I talked about it loads with people afterwards, so that was really, really good. And actually I suppose the nicest thing and one of the benefits I suppose about being in London is that we are a bit more liberal, I suppose, than some communities are. But don't think for a second, you know, that when we're doing our rainbow roads for Pride Month, we don't get, you know, well, how much have you spent on this, and the loony left Labour Council, here they go again. But the really amazing thing is that over a period of time, you get more positive responses than you do negative ones. And actually, I think from those experiences, that really does help build your confidence moving forward. So even if you get a couple of knockbacks, you maybe don't get selected, you get selected and you don't win, all of those are useful experiences for resilience, because when you do eventually make it into office, resilience is the name of the game.
I think for me, quite a different experience to Michael's. My sort of identity was never an issue in the selection process, because I joined the Labour Party at 17 already out, and so by the time I was selected 6 years later, nobody had ever known any different about me. So it just sort of, it never came up. And obviously, this is a very different area to London, but you know, there are sheep walking down my road as I speak. But as Michael said, I think the public, even in areas like this, can be much more supportive than perhaps they're giving credit for, and sometimes more supportive than the party, apart from Keith, who comes to my residents group, who always asks why I haven't got a boyfriend yet, but that is another issue. In terms of sort of communicating identity to a straight audience, I have to be really honest and say I never really thought, I mean, I'm probably fortunate in that I felt able to do this, that I never really thought about it. I just did me. And I think sometimes that, certainly when I started out, that meant some councillors, some officers didn't really know how to deal with me. But over time, I think I just did me, and they just learned that I was just a person like them. And, you know, over time, it just sort of became just the way it was.
I'm going to ask people to come in on this last question if they have something specific to say, because we're running out of time, sadly. We've had a couple of questions about specific support for disabled candidates and disabled councillors, and specifically those with autism. I was wondering if anyone could just give a quick comment on, you know, support that we can give for people with intersecting identities as well.
On the second, on the autistic members, there is a group called Neurodivergent Labour. So I definitely recommend getting in touch with them. I'm afraid I don't know an enormous amount about what they do, but I at the very least, I'm sure, as we said before, it will enable people to find allies. I saw the question in the chat about face-to-face. I mean, you can't really get away from face-to-face contact as a councillor. Having said that, I mean, an enormous amount of council work is now done by email, so you don't have to go and see people necessarily. And even before lockdown, people weren't necessarily coming to, you know, waiting for you to hold your surgery once a month. They're much more likely to be contacting you via, you know, email and Twitter. But if face-to-face is extremely difficult for you, I don't know what reasonable adjustments could be put in place, but I'd say, you know, do your research early and inquire about this sort of thing as well. But yeah, neurodivergent labour, I'm 99% certain they're called. I'm sure we'll have people with experience.
It's probably also worth mentioning that the majority of wards that you'd stand in and be elected to in, well, at least in England and Wales, as far as I know, are multiple member wards. So there'll be yourself and hopefully one or even two other, hopefully Labour colleagues, and the work will be spread between you. So I know, for example, so Newham's quite unique in the sense that every single, and those of you outside London, cover your ears, every single councillor is Labour. So we have the entire council. So in every single ward, there's 3 councillors, and the work is very much shared. And you've all got your strengths. So maybe one of you is the talkative one. Maybe one of you is the one who, when the residents do need a supportive ear, do need some encouragement, do need to be reassured that things are being looked into, that's who'll have that chat. They're the friendliest one, maybe the most patience on the phone. You might have another one who is better at delving into the depths of a scrutiny report and finding a hole that needs plugging and making sure that that can be brought up at the scrutiny meeting and plugged before there is an issue further down the line, because they're quite forensic with those reports and they can get through the detail very easily. That will be their specialty. And somebody else might be really, really good at writing those detailed emails that some residents need, or scary emails that perhaps a energy company or a housing association needs to get something done. And it's very much spread out. I've never met a councillor, myself included, who is an expert at all of the skills required to be a councillor. It's very much something that you share among the diversity of your Labour group. And so while I think Katie's right, I'm not sure immediately the specific reasonable adjustments from the top of my head that can put in place. There's definitely room for manoeuvre. There's definitely room for that to be done, because as long as people are forthcoming, and I know it's not as always easy to be, but from application progress and process moving forward to say, these are my strengths, these are my weaknesses, this is something that I think I could improve, and this is something that is very much part of who I am and how my brain functions, and I'll always struggle to do this particular task. If your colleagues know that, that should be fine. They should be able to say, well, we can cover that bit of it, and if this is what you're good at, we'll make sure there's this, and if you want to improve at this, we'll help you out with that. And there's definitely skills that I didn't have when I got elected in 2018, diplomacy being among them, that I've now got much, much, much better at. And if it weren't for me putting my name forward to become a councillor, I wouldn't have developed that. But that's not to say I still don't get nervous at a public speaking engagement or things like that. Some things just will never go away and will always be required in the role. But that's not to say that you have to be the best at that thing, because you will have colleagues and allies to spread the workload.
Thanks so much to both of you. We are running very slightly over time. So I will say, if anyone wants to say a final 30 seconds of inspiration, do feel free to crop in and say something. Now's the time. Too much pressure, great. Thank you so much. I certainly feel very inspired from hearing you both, and I'm dithering about running for council at the moment, so I feel very much inspired to do that, as I'm sure many other people do.
Do it, Ella.
Yeah, I don't know if I have time. I don't want to be a bad councillor. It's my current thought process. Thank you guys so much. Your expertise, your knowledge and your inspiration has been unbelievable, and thank you guys so much. I'm going to bring in the wonderful Martin Angus. We've heard why you should be a LGBT Labour councillor, and he's basically going to tell you how to do that. So thank you guys so much. It is so hugely appreciated.
Okay, thank you very much, Ella. And just to reiterate, my thanks to you and Ollie for organising this evening, and to Michael, and to Danny, and to Katie, and Tom and Josh for giving up their evening to speak. There's, as Michael said, it's an exciting time to be in local government. And you know, we're out of power nationally. There's still a lot we can achieve. And if you just look back over this last year, it's Labour councils that have led the way through the COVID crisis. You know, when the government was saying we're going to feed the vulnerable, I can tell you now that they sent catering sized tins of Angel Delight to feed pensioners in Newcastle upon Tyne. That's what they received. And it was Labour councils all across the country who said this isn't good enough. We've got to give them food that's nourishing and that they can eat and they want to eat and all the rest of it. It was Labour councils that led the way on that, and many other issues. Danny with the schools issue in Greenwich, and so on and so on and so on. As Tom said, it's important that we stand Labour candidates in as many places as possible. This is a little commercial advert now. I hope everybody on this call has got a postal vote or an early vote, whatever you want to call it. If you haven't, you should have. You should always vote by post. I know people like to put it in the box, but please, one, if you're a candidate on polling day, you should be too busy to go and spend half an hour at a polling station. And two, particularly with this year, you don't want to think, I'll leave it till polling day and then get a text message from Dido Harding saying you're not allowed to go out, or even worse, be ill. So please get yourself a postal vote or an early vote or whatever you want to call it, and encourage your friends and family to do so. So having heard the speakers, we're going to look a bit about now how you get selected. I'm going to try and share my screen. Please let me know you can see it, because me and technology are not the best of friends usually. Here we go. I think that might be it. Share, and then from beginning. Now, can you see that? Yeah, okay. So this evening we're going to look, in the next few minutes, I'm not going to take as much time as perhaps said, we are going to look about how you get selected as a candidate. So we're going to look at getting on the panel, then getting on a shortlist, and then getting selected. So the panel, what do we mean by the panel? Well, before a set of elections, the Labour Party in your area will write to every Labour Party member you email to ask for people to come forward who want to stand for their local authority, for their council. And it's everybody's choice whether they do so or not. You self-nominate, so if you want to stand, you self-nominate. You don't need someone else to nominate you. You don't need the party to nominate you. You self-nominate. But you do need to apply in writing, so you do need to fill out, there's a standard application form for your authority area, and you'll need to include a personal statement. Now, if you Google Labour Party selection forms, you can find them on the internet. So you can see them and see the sort of questions that you'll be asked. Or if you're really geeky, you can find the Labour Party rulebook on the internet and read through that as well. But all the information is there. I've also put in the chat the LGA Labour Group Be a Councillor guide, which is available on our website, or there's a link in the chat. And once we ever get back to the office, then we can always send out hard copies as well. And I think my email's in there, put my email in there. So if anybody wants me to send you the PDF, more than happy to do that as well. So the panel is created from all the people that apply. So for example, take Hackney, for example. If 80 or 90 people decide to apply to be councillors, and they fill out the forms, then what will happen with those people is they'll all be called for an interview, and the interview is to assess you have the right skills and knowledge, etc., to be a councillor. That's what the interview process is for. It should be done with people from outside that local authority area, so no one has a vested interest. So it would usually be even people from another local authority area who would do it in Hackney, and vice versa in other authorities, so no one has a vested interest. And at that's your first opportunity to pitch why you want to be a councillor. So go in there, be aware of what you've put on the form, photocopy the form you send before you send it in, so you know what you've written, and think about what you want to say to them when you ask the questions. They'll probably ask you some questions about what you understand are the local issues in your area, so you need to know them. So it's a good idea to either read your local newspaper if there is one, or even watch some council meetings if they're viewed online. Hopefully not as bad as Hanford Parish Council, but if you can watch some, then do so. They'll probably ask you a bit about what you understand the role of a councillor to be. So think about whether that's a backbench councillor, a cabinet member if you have a cabinet member or committee system, and so on. and they may well ask you about some current issues. So be well, try and be well up on all the local issues that there are. You shouldn't be informed about the method of interview and whether you need to do a presentation. It's not usual to need to do a presentation. Once that's over, you'll be informed of the panel's decision. And if the vast majority of people apply to go on the panel are put on the panel. If you're not put on the panel, then there will be an appeals process where you can go to regional office. And obviously the people doing the interviews have to do it properly and fairly and right why they've decided not to put you on the panel. If you appeal, it will go to the regional board, and the some members of the regional board will have a look at it and they'll make a decision. And I can tell you now that they do overturn decisions that are made. Well, that's the right decision, that's fair. That person didn't have the necessary skills or knowledge, and then they'll look at it and say, we don't think that's fair, and they'll overturn the decision. So you have got a right of appeal. It's important, as I said, to demonstrate the skills and knowledge. You've got to be prepared for written questions about what you've put on your form. And as I say, once it's over, you'll be informed of the panel decision. So that's the first stage to going through the selection process. Then, as Katie said, it's important you decide where to stand. Now, you know, we've got a wide range of authorities throughout the country. We've got two-tier authorities where you've got county councils and district councils. We've got unitary authorities like all of London or the Met areas as well. So, and then Wales are all unitary authorities. They're all called county unitary councils in Wales. So you've got to have a think about what wards you might be interested in. And some that there'll be more than others. You know, if you've got an area like Newham, where it's all Labour councillors and the vast majority of them want to stand again, then if you want to stand, you might have to put yourself up against, you know, someone who's already an existing councillor. But in other areas, we'll be looking for as many candidates to come forward as possible. So it does vary from area to area. As I say, look out for the communication from your local party, and it usually comes from the local campaigns forum or whatever they're called now, secretary, who'll send out the information. And you can register your interest. They usually have a branches or procedures secretary, and you can register your interest with them. So once the panel's complete, and for example, I'm going back to Hackney, if we had 80 or 90 people on the panel, the details of everyone on the panel is sent to branches. Then the shortlisting is based on electoral wards. So not the branch, because the branch may not be coterminous with the ward or the division. So divisions, obviously county councils, wards is borough and Mets and unitary councils. So when you go to the shortlisting, it's up to members of that ward or whatever to say, we want to nominate these people to be our councillors. Very often, if there are existing councillors who want to stand again, who've done a good job, they'll get nominated. And it may be that only they get nominated, but it's every member's right to nominate other people. So getting people to go to that meeting and support you is quite important. Members at the meeting nominate based on the information provided on the application forms. So it does come down to some personal contact. Personal contact in advice can be helpful, but I would always say don't be overbearing. Now, obviously, we haven't had any of those delightful Labour Party socials for the last year and all the meetings and things that we normally go to. But if you are serious about it and you're in an area where there's lots of people, for example, who want to stand, it probably does mean going to those Labour Party socials, buying the raffle tickets, winning the prize you took, and going to the meetings and everything else, because you have to get known and you have to build up some supporters who will go out and speak for you at that meeting. So when it comes to selections, once you're shortlisted, make a campaign period, and it can be a short time scale between shortlisting and selection. And then it comes to the selection meeting. So there'll be a meeting, all the members in that electoral division or ward will be invited. Doesn't mean that you'll get a massive turnout. Very often it can be 6 or 8 people, sometimes in areas with larger membership. And obviously, you know, it's great the Labour Party's got a larger membership now, so you might get quite a lot of people. So you've got to be prepared and think about, are there going to be 6 or 10 people, or are there going to be 150 people, and how am I going to cope with that? You will need to prepare a speech often and then answer questions. Your speech is often 5 minutes, so the Q&A is often 5 minutes. Nobody should be allowed to ask any questions that are personal or not about politics, etc. You know, in the old days, people used to ask people, you know, women, are you going to have any more children and all that nonsense? You know, we shouldn't have any more of that, and I don't think, you know, we should have any other questions that are just not relevant. So hopefully all the questions will be about policy and your unique selling point, if you like. Once the speeches and Q&A has been done, then it comes down to preference voting. So if you know you're going to stand in a ward and you know it's competitive, and you speak to someone and say, will you vote for me? And they're honest with you and they say, you know, I would do, but I'm voting for someone else. Ask for their second preference. Don't be shy about it. Say to them, that's wonderful. Can I ask for your second preference then? And lots of people will do that. So don't be shy about asking for second preferences, because obviously you've got to get to over 50% to win, and usually, not usually, but very often the person who gets the highest number of votes on the first count doesn't always win on the second or third or fourth, going through selections. So, as I say, often there's a small number of members involved, so you do need to make contact. There aren't postal or proxy votes normally for council ward selections, so you will need to get members to attend the selection meeting. So if you're really organised and you've got friends with cars who can do lifts, or you've got an Excel spreadsheet and you can ring people up and remind them of the date, all these things matter. They really do matter. When my parents retired, they moved to Fleetwood, which is in Lancashire. One of the first people, they were obviously Labour Party members, one of the first people to go and see them was their Labour Party councillor, and my mum thought it was marvellous. You know, this celebrity had gone to visit them, and she gave him tea in the china cups and saucers and lots of cake, and he asked my dad, who was a vicar, to be his chaplain because he was going to be mayor, and he thought this was the best thing ever. And then a few months later he was up for selection, and of course he rang my mum and dad, said, I've got to be reselected, will you come and vote for me at this meeting? And of course, having never really attended Labour Party meetings, off they toddled and went and voted for him. And I said, you do realise that visit when he came to see you and you gave him cake and everything was all about that? They got no idea, bless them, no idea at all. So it's really important that you do think about that, and you do think about how you can get people to turn out and vote for you. There may be specific rules on communications allowed with members. If there are, make sure you abide with them. You don't want to be kicked out of a selection process because you've broken the rules. So do stay in contact with the procedures secretary or the LCF secretary. Make sure you meet all the deadlines. It's your responsibility to do that. Think about what your pitch is now. Even if you're not going to stand till next year or the year after, start making some notes. Why do I want to stand? What can I offer? What is it that sets me out from the other people who will all probably be good people wanting to stand in a ward? What sets me out from them? You know, why is it me that people should vote for? Don't leave it till the last minute, till the meetings are called. Prepare your forms and speeches and your pitch in advance. Get help and constructive criticism. So when I say help and constructive criticism, try your speech on people, not your family, because they might, well, if you get on with your family, they'll probably say, yeah, that's great. They might not think it's great at all. So find some people who will give you constructive, helpful criticism and say, this was great, but this is where you could improve. And make sure you observe the rules. Don't be ignorant of the rules. As I say, knowing them is your responsibility. Don't be afraid to ask. There are people in the party and the officers of the CLP or the area who will give you information. If you can't get it through them, of course, you can go to regional office or obviously come to us at the LGA Labour Group. Don't fail to think it through in advance, and don't fail to get some help. So my 5 rules for getting selected: define your pitch. Why are you interested? What do people, and when you're asked why are you interested, don't say because you want the council allowance. 1, because it's not very much money, and 2, that's really not the right answer to give. So why are you interested? What do people want in their representative? Obviously they'll want you to work hard, they'll want you to work hard for your area. What are your strengths? What experience do you have? It doesn't matter if you don't have local government experience, but what other experience can you bring? What life experience can you bring to the role? And what do you care about? 2, be confident. Try to project confidence. this is the first election, if you like, before you stand for election. So you've got to be able to project, you've got to be able to communicate, practice your pitch, practice, 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 and practice it again. We all speak better when we practice. We all speak better when we do breathing exercises before we speak. He says, and so practice your pitch, and do try and try and find somewhere where you can do it that makes you feel confident as much as you can. Be quick off the mark. The grapevine. Where will there be vacancies? Are people standing down? Are people retiring? As Katie says, you don't have to be local to your ward, but it can often help if people know you. If you're not local to your ward, then you probably do need, or you're standing in a borough where you've got several CLPs, you probably do need to be known if you're standing in a ward that's not within your own CLP. And if you haven't got connections, then make some. Rule 4, blow your own trumpet. You've got to do it before anyone else will. And most of us are not very good at that because, we're British and or whatever. But, we just think that blowing our own trumpet isn't the right thing to do. But you've got to do this because, it is a competition. Getting selected is a competition to start with. And you've got to, you've got to put forward why you're the right person for the job. Practice, practice, and practice. Communicate effectively. And as I've said before, keep an eye on becoming overbearing. And 5th, know your voters. So getting selected, it's the members who are your voters in this election. This is the first election, and it's the party members who are your voters. Who do you know now? Start making a list of them. Get in touch with them. Make sure you can go and phone them. And if you can't phone them, do face-to-face visits. And so that when you come to this election, you've got a group of people who you can rely on to turn out and vote for you. And finally, good luck.
Thanks, Martin. Would you mind just unsharing your screen?
Yeah. Oh. No. Do you know how I do that? Stop share. There we go. So I've learned something tonight.
I hope everyone found that enjoyable. I think we've had a few questions in the chat, so I don't know if anyone wants to, any of the panelists wants to look through some of the questions. I think it'd be quite useful for some of the speakers to, because we've got a bit of time left, to maybe talk about how they found the selection process, to kind of give a bit of a personal take on it, and in particular maybe speak about kind of their sexuality in relation to how they found the selection process. Which panelist wants to go first?
I don't mind starting. I mean, to be honest, a place like Hackney, it would be almost unthinkable for us not to have probably several openly LGBT plus councillors in the Labour group. So I think it may well be different from people from other parts of the country. But as I said before, I mean, it may not even come up unless you choose to bring it up, and obviously then that is your choice. You're not obliged to come out as part of the selection process, and you may consider that it's not relevant to seeking selection, and that is a rational and acceptable view, any more than you would mention if you had dependents or an invisible disability or something like that. But having said that, obviously something that's a really important part of who you are. A lot of people feel that they don't want to have to keep that under wraps either. But again, it's just worth thinking about in advance how you want to handle it. But as I said before, saying I'm an active member of LGBT Labour could be a really useful way of bringing up the subject, because it is relevant to your selection, because it shows that you are taking part in another Labour Party body, or affiliated society, I should say.
I think one of the other ways that it can naturally come up as well is due to the fact that, and I think Tom touched on this before, one of the reasons that we're likely very politically active and politically aware is because we're in the LGBT community. We know what an impact government, both locally and nationally, and what impact legislation can have on our lives. And I know that when Michael was talking about Section 28, completely resonated with me, because I was at school during the tail end of Section 28, and the whole time that I was at school, there was no inclusive relationship and sex education. And so when it came to campaigning in the Labour Party, for all the reasons that we always want a Labour government naturally, LGBT rights was a huge part of that. And campaigning, for equal marriage in 2013 and 2014 with LGBT Labour and being involved in that, and then campaigning for inclusive RSE, etc., and then wanting to bring, like Katie, I'm also on the SACRE committee, and wanting to make sure that we're doing the RSE in my borough, naturally came up in conversation at the interview, because it was, what political experience do you have? What campaigning experience do you have? Well, that's my campaigning experience. LGBT youth groups, equal marriage, inclusive RSE, huge legislative things that make life better for LGBT people, both young and old, in terms of, the Equality Act and everything else. And so naturally, it's probably one of the reasons that you're politically involved. And absolutely, do not hesitate to say that, and as Martin says, to blow your own trumpet and say, one of the reasons that I'm in the Labour Party is because I believe in equality, and these are the campaigns that I've been involved in, and this is one of the reasons that I think I have the experience to represent people and volunteer to be elected by them on the council, and to do good things legislatively, because I know the impact that local legislation can have on people's lives, because it's had an impact on mine. That's a totally legitimate way of bringing it in.
Ollie, just one thing I just wanted to repeat that Martin said is never underestimate the power of going and asking Labour Party members what their views are about issues in the local community and nationally, and B, you sharing your story with them. I've stood in countless selections now for local government, both county and borough, but also a parliamentary selection. And in the first few selections, my sexuality wasn't an issue because I wasn't out and I didn't get asked. As Katie said, so don't fear that. It was an issue in the latter selections because I've come out by that point. I was confident enough to have come out, and members were really, really supportive. And, I could talk about some of the campaigns I've been involved in, etc. But I just wanted to reaffirm what Martin said, that personal touch, writing to members, personally writing to members, going and visiting members. I can't remember who it was. It might have been Chris Bryan. Somebody gave me a really good tip, which is, if you're going to go and do house visits, which we can't do at the moment, and have a cup of coffee, as Martin talked about with the person who went to see his mum and dad, wear a pair of wacky socks, because they'll never forget that you were the person sat in their living room with a strange coloured pair of socks on. And there are small quirks and things that about grabbing people's attention that actually are really important in a selection. And the selection is important in itself, and people want to know about your story and your values and the campaigning you've done with the party. But I just always reflect, and 9 out of 10 people in the Labour Party joined the party because they wanted to change the world. We still unfortunately have about 1 in 10 people in the Labour Party who join because they want to change the minutes of the last meeting. And you just have to forget about those 1 in 10. But the 9 in 10 who wanted to change the world want to hear from you about what motivated you. So go and have a coffee with them and just have a chat with them. And then, the really powerful thing you can do in your speech is genuinely reference those people in your selection speech. I've been out talking to members in the last few weeks, and I've heard from, Joe, who told me that this issue was really important, and this is what I've been doing on the issue. And because party members want to feel part of what's going on in the town hall, and they see you as their representative, and choosing your local council, your MP, is a really important thing for them. So I think the human touch really does count and really does matter. And don't get sidetracked by the factionalism and the people who want to draw you into divisive debates, because actually they won't win you a selection. What will win you a selection is being a decent person who's got decent values, who cares about changing people's lives for the better and cares about their community. And by and large, most Labour Party members are thoroughly decent people who just want to see thoroughly decent people elected who want to do a good job. So I think it's a really powerful point that Martin said, Ollie, that is a good tip for a selection.
Great, thank you, Michael. Tom or Danny, do you want to kind of come in on here?
I'll see Tom. So just jump in quick. Is that okay? I just dug this out actually. I was just looking at my my little manifesto that I did when I stood to be leader, and it's interesting that it is in two parts. That one bit is about my vision for Greenwich and what I was saying about what I wanted to do, and the other bit is entitled "Shaping This Vision: My Life Experience," because actually the two things are connected, but they're also not the same. And I think you know, sort of actually writing stuff down, I find very helpful in terms of being able to articulate then what it is that you want to say and what it is that you want to do. So I would encourage people to sort of spend the time doing that. And also, you know, just because you're sort of in public life, don't think that you have to like absolutely give up your whole self and tell everyone everything. And I'd really advise you not to do that because clearly, like, hopefully we've all had like, you know, really good times out, really good weekends. And you know, like some of my best times are with people who've got nothing to do with the Labour Party and no interest, frankly, in sort of, you know, the minutes or the raffles or the standing orders. And actually that keeps you really grounded. So yeah, I think my top tip would be, you know, write down, you know, what it is that you want to do and try and contextualize that in what makes you unique in bringing that to the table.
Thank you, Danny. Tom, did you want to kind of say anything in here?
I don't think I could really add anything to what Martin or the others said, really. It would be incredibly rare to have a local government selection that was contested here. Mine wasn't. I don't think we've ever had one in my time here. But certainly things like when I was up and I was relatively new, making myself known with local members, whether that be going to see them over the phone. I think we put out like a leaflet just to members introducing who I was and stuff. But no, I just endorse what Martin and the others said, really.
So one of the questions we had in the Q&A was whether they'll be able to access the slides. Yeah, we'll email them out to everyone afterwards. I think Martin was going to ask another question that was in the questions in relation to what the process is in Scotland.
Yes, I can talk about that. And just, sorry, I should have also said, we haven't covered it tonight. Sometimes when we have longer, we look at how you get selected and then how you get elected. The best thing about making contacts as well is that once you've got through your selection, if you keep up those relationships, you'll also get a load of people who come out and deliver leaflets for you, come out and knock doors for you. You know, we're in a very lucky position in the Labour Party that we can choose who we go and campaign for, and we can choose who we don't go and campaign for. And, you know, most of us anyway. And you know, the people who've got the best skills at relationship building and friendship building are the people who have more people out campaigning for them. And again, so it's really important that we do. So there was a question in the chat about Scotland and the selection process. I think it's probably a similar selection process in Scotland in that you'll need to self-nominate, you'll need to fill out a form. But what there is obviously in Scotland, there is a different system of voting for local government. So in England and Wales, it's first past the post. It's the same as any other election that we have, most of the elections, not every other election, but most of the elections we have, it's first past the post. Mayoral elections, if you've got directly elected mayor, of course, you've got to get 50%. So the top two, if they don't get 50%, go into all the votes are reallocated. In Scotland, they have single transferable vote. So that means if there are 11 candidates, you can rank all 11 candidates from 1 to 11. So it's quite complicated. It means their counts usually last for about 3 weeks. It means that we don't necessarily contest every seat in Scotland because, and I don't understand it because I'm not clever enough, but there are clever people who tell you that it actually damages us to stand every single seat, because if you look at STV and the way people vote, we probably win more by not standing in every single seat. I don't understand that myself because I'm just not clever enough, but there are plenty of clever people who do understand it.
It's called plumping the vote, Martin.
There you go. See, I knew this. Katie understands it. I don't, but Katie does, and other people do. So yeah, so it also means that in Scotland, the vast majority of councils are a coalition because where you've got STVs, which is in effect PR, you tend not to get majority control.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think we're kind of out of any questions. I don't know if any of the panelists want to add anything else to the conversation. If you do, then please do so.
I just wanted to say, for anyone that was worried they might not have the time or be able to offer the commitment to stand and be a local councillor, if you are in a full-time job and you're also a member of a union and your workforce is unionised, which is how it should be, legally you are entitled to 20 days a year off for public duty. So when I worked full-time for a local authority, when I got selected, I told my line manager. When I got elected, I told my bosses, and it was quite clear that as long as the legitimate notice was given, ample notice was given, if I needed time off for certain meetings, or if I needed to make sure that I didn't work certain evenings to attend meetings, to do casework, etc., to do visits in the daytime, that can happen sometimes. It absolutely was allowed, and it's your right by law, because getting involved in your local authority, it's really important that you understand that steps have been taken to make sure that it's as accessible as possible. And of course it isn't, it needs to be better, but it's people like Martin, like Katie and others who've been here far longer than I have made sure that this process is more and more accessible each time that it happens. So you are entitled to that time off. You should be able to make that time commitment, and it's often not as much as people think. Some people can turn it into a part-time job and can turn it into something they do, 30 hours a week. Others are quite disciplined and make sure that I can only be on so many committees. This is my casework hours, etc., etc. And you're completely in control of your time in that way. So please don't let the time commitment put you off. It's a team role, like I said, with your ward colleagues, and you absolutely should be able to hopefully make that work with your employer and do both.
Thanks very much, Joyce. Yeah, I think we're kind of wrapping up now. I want to thank everyone for taking part. I think the kind of key takeaway is to remember to be yourself and to do your research. I think that kind of if you've got those two things, then you'll do well. If you're from a particular background, then please don't be afraid to stand. Like, you've got the support. You've got the support of the panelists here. You've got the support of Ella and I, and you've got support of your regional representatives. And if you're from a particular group within the LGBT plus community, there are also representatives specifically for those. So if you're BME, or if you're trans, or if you've got disability, then please reach out to any of our representatives. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think that like 6% of councillors are LGBT plus, and I think that actually you guys, you're the perfect people to be standing. Please do stand. Like I say, you've got our support, because we really need a lot more representation. I think that kind of a lot of the issues that we're facing, a lot of kind of the regressive policies that local councils are putting in place, is because there's very little representation and diversity on those councils. So please, we ask you to stand. I'd just like to thank the Local Government Association Labour Group and Martin and Angus for your help, and for doing a lot of the work in terms of putting this on. I'm really, really appreciative. I know they're kind of like outside your work, so I'm really, really, really appreciate that. And I really want to thank as well specifically Katie, Josh, Danny, Michael, and Tom for also taking part. Your insight has been absolutely incredible, and I know that kind of there's lots of things and lots of information that the audience have really taken away from what you're saying, and I'm sure that also if anyone in attendance, if any of the audience want to get in touch with you, then you guys will also be happy to kind of field any questions separately. I also want to thank Ella, my co-chair, for putting this on. She's had to do a little bit more than normal because I had tech issues today or this week in terms of kind of laptop breaking down. So I kind of want to make a specific thanks to Ella for all that she's done, and also thank you everyone for attending. Please, thank you so much for taking your time out for attending, and keep in touch with us.
Can we just ask panelists to hold on for 1 second so we can get a lovely photo? And thanks to Ollie for all the work you've done on this, and Martin as well. So Ollie, you're taking it, so I'll let you do countdown. I'm smiling.
I'll see if I can do it. I'm on the iPad. I don't think I can. It's not. It doesn't come up the full
I'll do
screen.
it. So everyone smile.
Sorry.
In 3, 2, 1. Right, perfect. Thank you everyone so much for coming. I'll close the meeting now, and if anyone ever needs LGBT Labour, do drop us a message. And thanks everyone for time on the panelists for their time. So appreciated.
Thank
Stay safe,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
For having me.
No.